She locked the door to her small room every night with 2 deadbolts, wedged the chair under the doorknob, and still slept with a light slumber that shattered at the slightest creak of the floorboards. At 20 years old, Marianne Vance ran from every man like one runs from a tornado that has already destroyed everything once before. But then came a different kind of man, a widower with tired eyes who did something no one expected. He sat on the porch near her door and simply waited. He asked for nothing, forced no conversation, invaded no space. He just waited day after day until her heart understood that not every man was a threat. Can you imagine living with so much fear that the simple fact of a man looking in your direction makes your whole body tremble? That any male voice raised too loud makes you retreat to the corner of the room like a cornered animal? That you would rather go hungry than cross a street where a group of men is talking? Marianne had lived like this for 5 years, ever since she fled Savannah with nothing but the clothes on her back and a trauma no one could heal. But sometimes love doesn't come as an explosion. Sometimes it comes as a silent, patient presence that slowly dissolves the ice until you realize you aren't frozen anymore. But this story happened in the heart of the Tennessee countryside, in September of 1923, in a small village called Hope Valley, where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were a commodity more valuable than gold. If you are watching this story, leave a comment below telling us which city or state you are joining us from. I love knowing that these stories from the old days reach so many different places. And if you like real stories of overcoming odds and finding true love, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss the next tales. Now, let's go to Marianne's story, which will move you from beginning to end. The sun hadn't completely risen when Marianne opened her eyes that Friday in September. The neighbor's rooster crowed for the 3rd time, a sign it was past 5 in the morning. She rose slowly from the narrow bed, the corn husk mattress rustling under the minimal weight of her thin frame. 20 years old, but she seemed to carry the weariness of a lifetime on her curved shoulders, in the way she walked, always looking at the ground, in the contained gestures of someone who had learned to occupy the smallest possible space in the world. The small room at the back of St. Rita's boarding house was only about 60 square feet. A bed, a chair, a small dark wooden dresser where she kept her few clothes, and the Singer sewing machine that Mrs. Beatrice had lent her 3 years ago, which had become the reason Marianne could pay her rent and eat 1 decent meal a day. The single window looked out onto the backyard on purpose. Marianne had requested this specific room when she arrived at the boarding house in 1918, at 15 years old, soaked with rain and terror, because she didn't want a window facing the street. She didn't want to see the movement of people, and she didn't want them to see her. She dressed in the dark, even though the weak light of dawn was already beginning to enter through the slit in the torn curtain. A long grey skirt, a beige long-sleeved blouse, despite the heat that was already announcing itself, a brown shawl covering her shoulders and part of her chest. Brown hair pulled back in a tight bun, no loose strands. A dull, invisible appearance. That was what Marianne sought every morning. A pretty woman attracts attention, and attention was the last thing she wanted. Before opening the bedroom door, the usual ritual. Breathe deep 3 times, count to 10, check through the keyhole if there was anyone in the hallway. Only then did she turn the key, remove the top bolt, then the bottom one, and move the chair aside. The door opened with a squeak she knew by heart. The 3rd floorboard in the hall creaked if you stepped in the center, so she stepped on the left edge. The kitchen was exactly 7 paces from her door. Mrs. Beatrice was already awake as always. The 55-year-old woman, a widow for 10 years, stout with a kind face, was stirring grits on the wood-burning stove. The smell of fresh coffee filled the room, along with the smoke escaping through the cracks of the old stove. "Morning, my child," Mrs. Beatrice said, with that motherly voice that still made Marianne's chest tighten after 5 years. The young woman murmured a barely audible "morning" went straight to grab the tin mug from the hook and poured black coffee. Mrs. Beatrice watched her out of the corner of her eye, an ancient worry that never diminished. "Did you sleep well?" Marianne nodded without raising her eyes, biting into the piece of cornbread the landlady had left aside for her. Maureen entered the kitchen at that moment, her heavy steps and loud voice breaking the morning stillness. The 24-year-old washerwoman had a big mouth, an easy laugh, and an expansive way about her that in the first few months had terrified Marianne, but over time had become familiar, even comfortable. Maureen was safe, predictable, incapable of malice. "Morning, God's creatures," announced Maureen, tossing her curly hair back and grabbing the biggest mug in the cupboard. "Miss B, did you hear a new guest is arriving today? Rich man, they say, owns a sawmill over in Knoxville." Marianne felt her entire body tense up. Her fingers gripped the mug so hard, her knuckles turned white. Mrs. Beatrice noticed immediately and shot a warning look at Maureen, who made a face of silent apology. "It's true," Mrs. Beatrice confirmed with a calm, measured voice. "Mr. Raphael Andrews has reserved the front room indefinitely. He's going to supervise some business of his here in the region. He's a widower, a serious man from what I've been told. Arrives before lunch." Marianne stood up so fast the chair almost tipped over. She murmured something about accumulated work and left the kitchen, heart beating out of rhythm, hands shaking. In the hallway, she leaned against the cold wooden wall, breathing deeply, trying to control the panic rising in her throat like bitter bile. Another man, another male presence in the boarding house. The other guests were three. Mr. Gus, a travelling salesman of 60, hunched and quiet, who barely spoke to anyone. Young Thomas, a 17-year-old boy studying at the village school who was afraid of his own shadow, and Professor Henry, a man in his 40s, married, who went back to the city every weekend. None of them represented a threat. None of them paid attention to Marianne beyond a polite and distant greeting, but a new man, rich, a widower. This meant movement, conversations, perhaps visitors. It meant unpredictability, and unpredictability was poison to the fragile balance Marianne had built over the last 5 years. She went back to her little room, locked herself in, and sat in the chair in front of the sewing machine. She had 3 dresses to finish by the end of the week, an order from Mr. Oliver's general store that paid well, 50 cents per well-made piece. Her hands trembled as she picked up the navy blue fabric. The needle slipped twice before she managed to thread it. "Breathe, Marianne. Breathe. He's just another guest. He won't even notice you. Nobody notices." But the tightness in her chest didn't pass. The memories were never far. It only took a small trigger, a word, a smell, a shadow on the wall, and Marianne was back in Savannah, August 16th, 1918, 3 months after turning 15. The Carter family was one of the wealthiest in the port city. He, Mr. Alvin Carter, a timber merchant, owner of 3 warehouses at the docks, married to Mrs. Francis, father of 4 children. Marianne had started working in their house as a kitchen helper 2 months prior, recommended by the aunt who raised her after her parents died of typhoid fever when she was 7. Her aunt was a washerwoman, poor, living in a shack on the outskirts of the city. When Marianne turned 15, her aunt said she couldn't feed another mouth anymore. Either she found work or she was on her own. The Carter house was immense, 3 stories, imported furniture, a garden with flowers Marianne had never seen. She slept in the back room with the other 2 maids, woke up at 4 in the morning, slept at 10 at night. The work was heavy, but she was grateful. She ate well, had a roof, earned $3 a month that she saved in a cloth pouch hidden in her mattress. Mr. Carter was a tall, strong man with a thick mustache and an authoritative voice. In the first few days, Marianne barely saw him. He left early, returned late, dined with the family in the main dining room, where maids did not enter unless called. But then he started appearing in the kitchen at odd hours. 3 in the afternoon, when the house was quiet, the other maids resting, Marianne alone washing dishes. The first time he just stayed in the doorway, watching. The second time he entered, got a glass of water, commented that she was a hard worker. The third time he got too close. Marianne remembered every detail as if it had happened yesterday, not 5 years ago. The smell of cigar smoke he exhaled, the sweat on his forehead, even though the day wasn't hot. The way he blocked the door with his body when she tried to leave, the words he said, voice low, threatening. "A pretty girl like you needs to be smart. I pay well for those who please me. You want to keep working here, don't you?" When Marianne said no, when she tried to push him, when she screamed, he covered her mouth with his large, calloused hand. The other hand tore the neckline of her dress. Marianne struggled, dug her nails into his face, managed to bite the hand covering her mouth. He yelled in pain, let her go for a second, time enough for her to escape, run, cross the kitchen, the living room, the hallway, exit through the front door, run down the marble steps, run through the cobblestone street with her torn dress and terror roaring in her ears. She didn't go back to the Carter house. She didn't go back to her aunt's house. She knew no one would believe her. He was a rich man, respected. She was a poor maid, a nobody. The next morning, while she was still hiding in an abandoned shed near the docks, the news was already running through the city. The maid, Marianne Vance, had stolen jewelry from Mrs. Francis and fled. Mr. Carter had put the police on her trail. The marks on his face, the scratches. He had explained that she attacked him when he discovered the theft and tried to stop her from fleeing. Marianne was 15, had no money, no family who believed her, and the police of an entire city looking for her. She managed to hide for 3 days, eating scraps of food she found in the market trash. On the 4th day, she stowed away in a wagon heading inland. She travelled for 2 weeks, jumping from town to town, sleeping in barns, washing clothes to earn pennies, until she arrived in Hope Valley. Mrs. Beatrice had opened the boarding house door on a night of torrential rain in September of 1918 and found Marianne soaked, shivering, feverish. The girl collapsed into the older woman's arms and cried for the first time since it all happened. Mrs. Beatrice asked no questions that night. She just took her inside, gave her a hot bath, food, a clean bed. In the following weeks, Marianne told her little by little in painful fragments what had happened. Mrs. Beatrice believed her. She was the first person who believed. But believing didn't erase the trauma. It didn't make the memories disappear. It didn't stop Marianne's body from panicking every time a man got too close, spoke too loud, looked too long. In the first 2 years at the boarding house, Marianne couldn't stay in the same room with any man, not even old harmless Mr. Gus. Mrs. Beatrice served her meals in her room. With time, with infinite patience from the landlady and the protective friendship of Maureen, who arrived at the boarding house a year later, Marianne managed to leave the room, eat in the kitchen when no one was there, then eat at the common table, but always at the far end, always with her back to the wall, always near the exit. But that was the most she could manage. Any man who tried to strike up a conversation received icy silence and an immediate retreat. When Bruno Mercer, a 28-year-old fabric merchant, tried to court her 6 months ago, showing up at the boarding house with flowers, asking Mrs. Beatrice to mediate, Marianne had a panic attack so strong she vomited, fainted, and spent 2 days locked in her room without eating. Bruno didn't understand the rejection. Men like him never understand. He was offended, his pride wounded, and since then he looked at Marianne with barely disguised resentment every time they crossed paths on the street. The sewing machine sang its familiar rhythm, the pedal rising and falling under Marianne's right foot, hands guiding the fabric with precision born of years of practice. Sewing calmed her. It was something she controlled completely, every stitch, every thread, every movement predictable and safe. The world outside might be chaotic and frightening, but there, sitting on the wooden chair with the singer in front of her, Marianne had dominion. She managed to concentrate for 2 hours. She finished the hem of the navy blue dress, started the neckline of the second dress, a moss green one with lace details, but then she heard it. A male voice in the hallway, deep, polite, talking to Mrs. Beatrice. He had arrived. Marianne's heart raced again. She dropped her work, went to the door, pressed her ear against the wood. She could hear the conversation in the hall. Mrs. Beatrice was explaining the rules of the boarding house with her firm, motherly voice. Breakfast at 6, lunch at noon, dinner at 7 in the evening. Bed linens changed every Monday. Hot water for a bath needs to be requested in advance because it has to be heated on the stove. No noise after 10 at night. No alcohol inside the rooms. Respect for all residents. The man's voice responded in a low tone, agreeing with everything, a voice that wasn't aggressive, wasn't authoritarian like Mr. Carter's. It was just tired. "Thank you, Mrs. Beatrice," he said. "I promise to be a quiet guest. I just need a calm place to stay while I settle some business here in the region." Marianne heard footsteps going up the wooden stairs to the upper floor, where the larger rooms were. Heard the door opening, closing. Silence. She breathed a sigh of relief, went back to the sewing machine, but at lunch there was no avoiding it. Mrs. Beatrice had a rule. All guests ate together at the big kitchen table when they were at the boarding house during mealtimes. It was a way to create community, to make everyone feel at home. Marianne had managed with much effort to adapt to this, but she always arrived last, left first, and spoke the absolute minimum. When she entered the kitchen at noon, everyone was already seated. Mr. Gus in his usual spot, right end, chewing slowly with toothless gums. Professor Henry in the middle, reading a newspaper while waiting for the food. Young Thomas was helping Maureen bring the pots from the stove, and at the other end of the table, in the spot that usually stayed empty, was him. Raphael Andrews was 38 years old, but he looked older due to the visible weariness on his face. Tall, broad shoulders of someone who works with their hands, but clean hands, trimmed nails, dark brown hair already with grey strands at the temples, clean-shaven, eyes of a golden brown that at that moment looked at the empty plate in front of him with a distant expression. He wore a simple white shirt, dark trousers, leather suspenders. Nothing extravagant, nothing that screamed wealth, but the discreet quality of the clothes and the gold watch on his wrist betrayed a comfortable financial condition. Marianne stopped in the doorway, every muscle in her body tense, ready to flee. Raphael raised his eyes, saw her for the first time. For a fraction of a second, their gazes crossed. And then something happened that Marianne didn't expect. He looked away first. He didn't stare, didn't smile invasively, didn't make that gesture so many men do of appraising a woman from top to bottom. He just registered her presence with a slight nod, respectful and distant, and went back to looking at his plate. Mrs. Beatrice made the quick introductions. "Raphael, this is Marianne, our seamstress. Marianne, this is Mr. Raphael Andrews, our new guest." Raphael murmured a "pleased to meet you," without raising his eyes again. Marianne didn't answer, went straight to the spot furthest possible from him, at the opposite corner of the table. Lunch proceeded in relative silence. Maureen and Mrs. Beatrice talked about the absurd price of rice. Professor Henry commented on news from the Knoxville papers about politics. Mr. Gus chewed. Thomas devoured his food with an adolescent's appetite. Raphael ate slowly, methodically, without participating in the conversations. Marianne pushed the beans and rice around her plate without appetite, just wanting the meal to end soon. But she observed. Not directly, never directly, but with the peripheral vision she had developed as a survival mechanism. She observed the way he held the fork, the contained movements, the slightly hunched posture of someone carrying an invisible weight. She observed how he made no point of dominating the conversation, how he didn't interrupt anyone, how he thanked quietly when Maureen poured more water into his glass. When Marianne finished, she stood up too fast, the chair making a noise against the plank floor. Everyone looked. Raphael looked too, but again, only for a second, and with no expression other than mild curiosity. Then he went back to eating. Marianne left the kitchen with trembling hands, locked herself in her room, leaned her forehead against the wooden door. Her heart beat strong, but it wasn't just fear. There was something else, confusion, because that man hadn't done anything threatening, nothing, and that was disturbing in a different way. The following days established a pattern. Raphael was a quiet presence in the boarding house. He left early every morning, returned in the late afternoon covered in sawdust, the smell of fresh wood impregnated in his clothes. He dined with everyone, answered when someone started a conversation but didn't start one himself, went up to his room right after the meal, polite, distant, contained. Marianne continued to avoid being in the same room as him. She changed her breakfast time to 15 minutes earlier. She went back to asking Mrs. Beatrice to serve dinner in her room some nights, claiming a headache. But she couldn't avoid lunch because it was the time she took a break from sewing work, and skipping a meal made Mrs. Beatrice worry. So she continued sitting in the farthest corner, eating fast, leaving first. And Raphael continued without looking directly at her, without trying to talk, without doing absolutely anything to justify the terror Marianne felt. It was in the second week that Maureen confronted Marianne about it. The two were in the backyard hanging clothes on the line, a Thursday afternoon with strong sun and good wind for drying. Maureen hung up a sheet, turned to her friend and said bluntly, "Marianne, Raphael isn't a bad person." Marianne felt her whole body tense up. She didn't answer, continued folding the pillowcase in her hands. Maureen insisted, her voice softer. "I know you have your reasons to be afraid of men. Lord knows you do, but he doesn't seem like the type who hurts people. Miss B talked to folks from Knoxville. He lost his wife 2 years ago to a fever. They say he almost went mad with grief. Stayed locked in his house for months. Only went back to running the business because his brothers practically dragged him back. He's just a sad man, Marianne, not a dangerous man." Marianne finally looked at Maureen, her eyes hard. "You don't understand, Maureen," she said with a low but firm voice. "The man who hurt me was also respected, also polite, also seemed like a good person, until he wasn't. I'm not taking that risk again. Never again." Maureen sighed, didn't insist anymore. But her look was one of pity, and Marianne hated pity. That night, Marianne couldn't sleep. She lay in the narrow bed listening to the night sounds of the boarding house. The board that creaked in the hallway when someone went to the bathroom, the tick-tock of the clock in the living room, the wind moving the trees in the yard, and then another sound. Footsteps going down the stairs, someone going to the kitchen, probably to get water. She shouldn't get up, shouldn't spy, but curiosity, that old enemy, won. Marianne got up, went to the door, opened a tiny crack, looked. It was Raphael. He was in the kitchen, dimly lit by the moonlight entering through the window. He hadn't lit a lamp, probably so as not to wake anyone. He was sitting in the chair near the window, holding a glass of water, but he wasn't drinking. He just looked at nothing, the expression devastated by pain that he hid so well during the day, completely exposed in the solitude of the night. Marianne watched for longer than she should have. Observed the way he breathed deeply, how he ran his hand over his face in a gesture of deep weariness, how his shoulders were hunched under a weight no one saw. And for the first time since he arrived, Marianne thought, Maureen was right. This is just a sad man. She closed the door silently, went back to bed, but couldn't stop thinking, couldn't stop remembering the way he looked away whenever she entered a room, the way he kept a respectful distance. The way he tried nothing, forced nothing, just existed in the same space as her without invading. But even so, she couldn't trust, couldn't lower her guard, because trust was what had destroyed her once, and she wouldn't survive if it happened again. On the Friday of the third week, something changed. Marianne was in her small room, sewing a wedding dress, a special order that would pay $5, when she heard a strange noise coming from the kitchen. A loud bang, an altered male voice. She froze, the needle stopping in the middle of a stitch. Her first instinct was to lock the door, hide. But then she heard Mrs. Beatrice's voice, also altered, and worry for the woman who had saved her life conquered the fear. Marianne opened the bedroom door, peeked down the hall. In the kitchen, Bruno Mercer was standing visibly drunk, gesturing aggressively. Mrs. Beatrice was between him and the back door, arms crossed, expression firm despite the fear visible in her eyes. "I just want to talk to her," Bruno was saying, slurring his words. "Just want to know why she thinks she's better than me. Poor girl. No family, nothing, and refuses my request to court her. Who does she think she is?" Mrs. Beatrice responded with a controlled voice. "Bruno, you're drunk. Go home before I call someone." "Marianne doesn't want to talk to you, she's made that clear." Bruno took a threatening step toward Mrs. Beatrice. "I'm not asking for permission, old woman. I'm telling you I'm going to talk to that." He didn't finish the sentence, because at that moment Raphael came down the stairs, assessed the situation in 2 seconds, and crossed the kitchen in long, firm strides. He arrived between Bruno and Mrs. Beatrice, and his voice, which had always been low and polite, came out in a tone that admitted no dispute. "You are going to leave this house right now," he said, looking straight into Bruno's eyes. "You aren't coming back. You aren't going to look for any of the women living here. Understood?" Bruno, larger and visibly used to intimidating people with his size, gave a drunk laugh. "And who are you to give me orders?" Raphael didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He just moved half a step closer, and something in his posture, in the dangerous stillness of his tense body, made Bruno instinctively recoil. "I am someone who won't tolerate a drunk man threatening women. Leave now, or I will make you leave. And you won't like the second option." For a tense moment, the two men stared at each other. Then Bruno spat on the floor, muttered something about everyone being crazy in that boarding house, and stumbled out the back door. Mrs. Beatrice let out the breath she was holding. "Raphael, thank you. If you hadn't—" The man shook his head, the gesture saying no thanks were needed. Then he looked in the direction of the hallway, where Marianne was still hiding in the shadows, watching. Their eyes met for a prolonged second, and then Raphael simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement that she was there, that he knew she had seen, and went back up the stairs to his room without saying another word. Marianne went back to her room, locked the door, sat on the bed. Her hands were shaking, but not just from fear. There was gratitude there too, mixed and confused. Raphael had defended Mrs. Beatrice. He had defended her, even without her being physically present. He had placed his body between a threat and vulnerable women without hesitating. But good men can turn bad. The voice of trauma whispered in Marianne's mind. Don't trust. Never trust. She didn't sleep that night. On Saturday morning, Marianne left her room earlier than usual to get water from the well in the backyard before the boarding house woke up. She opened the back door and stopped. Raphael was sitting on the wooden bench on the porch, a cup of coffee in his hands, looking at the sun rising over the distant hills. She almost ran back inside, but he didn't turn his head, didn't look at her, just continued sitting there, quiet, as if he were part of the landscape. Marianne waited 15 seconds. Nothing. He didn't move, didn't speak, did absolutely nothing other than drink a sip of coffee. Slowly, heart beating fast, Marianne crossed the porch to the well, dropped the bucket, pulled the water, filled the clay pitcher, all the while feeling his presence there a few yards away, but a presence that didn't advance, didn't threaten, just was. When she returned to the back door with the heavy pitcher in her arms, Raphael finally spoke. "Good morning," he said without looking at her, voice low and neutral. Marianne didn't answer. She ran inside, closed the door, leaned against it, breathing heavily. But on Sunday morning, he was there again. Same place, same bench, same coffee cup, same stillness. Marianne went out to get water. He said good morning. She didn't answer. Ran inside. Monday morning, Tuesday, Wednesday. Always the same scene. Raphael sitting on the porch bench near the back door where Marianne needed to pass. Always quiet, always saying good morning softly, never looking directly, never trying to converse beyond that, just being present. On Thursday, Marianne woke up irritated. What did that man want? Why did he insist on being there every single day? If he thought he was going to get something out of this, he was wrong. She wasn't like other women who melted with male attention. She was broken, ruined, incapable of trusting. She left the room with the empty pitcher and crossed the porch with firm steps, without looking at where Raphael was sitting as always. She threw the bucket into the well with more force than necessary, pulled the water, turned to go back, and then she noticed there was a wildflower on the windowsill of her room, a small yellow flower, delicate, the kind that grew in the pasture near the woods. It wasn't there last night. Marianne looked at Raphael. He didn't look back, just drank another sip of coffee, eyes fixed on the distant horizon, as if he had absolutely nothing to do with the flower. She grabbed the pitcher, ran inside, slammed the door, but she took the flower, put it in a glass with water on top of the dresser, and spent the whole day looking at it, confused, frightened, and for the first time in 5 years, with something dangerously similar to hope wanting to sprout in her closed chest. 2 weeks passed since the first flower. Now there were 3 flowers in the glass on Marianne's dresser. She never saw Raphael placing the flowers. He never mentioned the flowers. But every Monday morning, when she went out to get water from the well, there was a new flower on the windowsill, and he continued sitting on the bench, drinking coffee, looking at the horizon as if it were the most natural thing in the world to be there every morning, saying nothing but good morning. Marianne didn't know what to do with that. His presence stopped being threatening, that she had to admit. But it was disturbing in another way. It was too constant, too predictable, too patient. Men in Marianne's experience always wanted something, always had an ulterior motive. There was always a price to pay, but Raphael asked for nothing, demanded nothing. He was just there. Maureen noticed the change before everyone else. One afternoon in October, while the two sewed together in Marianne's room, the washerwoman had brought mending to do while keeping each other company, she commented with that direct way she had. "You're less scared," she observed, while basting a tear in an old sheet. "You don't jump anymore when you hear a man's voice in the hall." Marianne didn't raise her eyes from the delicate embroidery she was doing on the wedding dress. "I don't know what you're talking about," she murmured. But her hands shook slightly, betraying the lie. Maureen smiled with the corner of her mouth. "I'm talking about Raphael, honey. Does he still sit out there on the porch every day?" Marianne didn't answer, but the silence was answer enough. Maureen continued. "Miss Bay said he asked if he could fix your sewing chair, said he noticed the leg is wobbly and that you have to put weight on one side just so you don't tip over. Asked if it would be too much of an intrusion if he fixed it." What a polite man, huh? Marianne's heart skipped a beat. He had noticed the chair, had paid enough attention to realize she always sat pulling her body to the right to compensate for the imbalance. That meant he watched her. And observation could be dangerous, but it could also be care. "I don't want him touching my things," Marianne said with a voice harder than she intended. Maureen raised her hands in surrender. All right, all right. I warned Miss B you'd probably say that. But look, if you change your mind, he said he can fix it in a jiffy. Works with wood his whole life, you know. For him it'd be a piece of cake. Marianne didn't change her mind. But that night, sitting on the wobbly chair, having to twist uncomfortably to sew the finish on the wedding dress, she thought about the offer, thought about what it would be like to work without back pain, without fear of tipping, thought about how Raphael had noticed, thought about how he had asked permission before doing anything, respecting her boundaries. On Friday morning, when she went out to get water and found Raphael in his usual spot, Marianne stopped. She stood there in the middle of the porch, empty pitcher in her arms, gathering courage. Raphael drank his coffee, didn't look at her, giving her space. And then, with a voice so low it could barely be heard, Marianne said the first direct words to him since he arrived at the boarding house months ago. "The chair," she murmured. If you still want to fix it, I would be grateful." Raphael didn't turn his head immediately. First, he finished drinking his coffee, slowly, giving her time to regret it if she wanted. Then he placed the cup on the floor beside the bench, looked in her direction but not directly in her eyes, and answered with an equally low voice. "I'll fix it this afternoon while you're eating lunch. You won't even have to see me doing it. When you get back to your room, it'll be ready." Marianne nodded once, fast, and ran to the well. Her hands were shaking so much she spilled half the water when she pulled the bucket. But it wasn't just fear making her shake. There was something else. Relief, gratitude, and that dangerous feeling of hope growing a little more. That afternoon after lunch, Marianne stayed outside her room for 20 minutes before entering. She knew Raphael would have already finished and left. He had given his word. But she was still afraid of finding something changed besides the chair, afraid he might have touched other things, afraid of invasion. When she finally opened the door, everything was exactly as she left it, everything except the chair. The chair was steady, all four legs touching the floor, perfectly leveled. Marianne sat down slowly, testing it. It didn't wobble, didn't lean. It was perfect, and on the seat, a small note written in neat handwriting. "The leg was cracked. I glued it and put a reinforcement. Should last another 10 years. Ah." Marianne held the note for a long time, read and reread the few words, then folded it carefully and put it in the dresser drawer, along with the 3 dried flowers she had pressed between the pages of an old book. If you are liking this story of overcoming adversity and true love, leave a like and share it with someone who also loves these stories from the old days. And stay until the end, because the best is yet to come. November arrived with rains that flooded the dirt roads of Hope Valley and turned the boarding house yard into a mud pit. Marianne hated rainy days because she couldn't use natural light to sew. She had to light the kerosene lamp, which made her eyes sting after hours of work. But the dress orders didn't stop. She had 6 pieces to deliver by the end of the month. She needed to work even with a headache. On an especially rainy Tuesday afternoon, Marianne was so concentrated on work she didn't notice when it got dark earlier than normal. Didn't notice time passing. Only realized when the lamp began to flicker, the oil running out. She stopped sewing, frustrated, looked out the window and saw it was almost dinner time. But she still had 2 hours of work ahead on that dress. Light knocks on the door made her jump. Her heart raced immediately. No one knocked on her bedroom door. No one ever came there. "Who is it?" she asked with a voice trembling slightly. The answer came in a low, calm tone. "Raphael, I brought an extra lamp." "Mrs. Beatrice said yours must be running out of oil." Marianne looked at the locked door. The rational part of her mind said she could simply ask him to leave the lamp outside. But another part, the part that was slowly, dangerously beginning to trust, made her get up, made her open the door. Raphael was there with a lit lamp in his right hand and a can of kerosene in his left. He didn't try to enter, stayed in the hallway, maintaining a respectful distance, held out the lamp toward her. His eyes met hers for a second, golden brown meeting dark brown, and then he looked away as he always did. "Thought you might need it," he said. "To finish your work. No need to return it today. Keep it as long as you need." Marianne took the lamp, her fingers brushing accidentally against his for a fraction of a second. She recoiled as if shocked, but forced herself not to run, forced herself to stay there and say thank you. The voice came out weak, but it came out. Raphael placed the oil can on the floor near the door, nodded, that gesture she already knew, and turned to leave. But then he stopped, stood there with his back to her for 2 seconds, as if deciding whether to say something or not. Finally he said, still without turning, "You don't need to be afraid of me, Marianne. I will never hurt you. I will never force anything. I just want you to know that." And then he walked away, heavy footsteps going up the stairs to his room on the 2nd floor. Marianne stood there in the open doorway with the lamp in her hand, heart beating out of rhythm, hot and unexpected tears burning her eyes. Because no one had ever said that to her. No one had ever validated her fear without judgment. No one had ever promised safety without asking for anything in return. She closed the door, sat in the fixed chair, lit the new lamp and cried silently while she continued sewing. Cried for the trauma she carried, cried for the 5 years of isolation, cried because a man had been kind without expecting a reward, and she didn't know how to handle it. The next morning, Raphael was on the bench as always. But this time, when Marianne came out to get water, she didn't cross the porch pretending he didn't exist. She stopped, looked in his direction, and said thank you, her voice firmer than the night before. Raphael didn't smile, didn't make a fuss, just nodded and replied, "You're welcome," then went back to looking at the horizon. And Marianne realized he was giving her control of the distance, the speed, everything. He would be there, constant and infinitely patient, but would never advance, would never pressure. The ball was in her court. The following days brought subtle changes. Marianne began to linger longer in the yard when getting water. First, just 15 seconds more, then 30. Then a whole minute watering the plants in Mrs. Beatrice's flower bed while Raphael drank coffee on the bench. They didn't talk, but being in the same space was ceasing to be torture and starting to be almost comfortable. It was Mrs. Beatrice who noticed and commented to Maureen one afternoon while the two prepared dinner. "He's doing everything right," the landlady said while peeling potatoes. "Doesn't force anything, doesn't invade space, just stays present. It's what she needs, someone to prove that not every man is a threat." Maureen, who was cutting meat for the stew, agreed. "But do you think she'll be able to trust for real someday? 5 years is a long time living in fear." Mrs. Beatrice looked through the kitchen window to the yard, where Marianne hung clothes on the line, movement still tense and careful, like someone living in constant alert. "If he keeps having patience, maybe. Raphael isn't a man who gives up easily. You see it in his eyes. He lost the woman he loved. He knows what pain is. He won't cause pain to anyone else on purpose." But not everyone in the village saw the situation the same way. Bruno Mercer, whose humiliation of being kicked out of the boarding house by Raphael had become tavern gossip, fed a resentment that grew every week. He saw Raphael and Marianne in the same space, saw the way she was beginning to relax near him, and it infuriated him more. How did that man achieve what he couldn't? Why did she accept attention from Raphael but reject him? Bruno started spreading poison, mean comments at Mr. Oliver's general store, insinuations at Mrs. Mercer's shop. He said Marianne wasn't a decent girl, that she had fled some crime in Savannah, that she fooled everyone with that saintly face, said Raphael was a widower too rich to be interested in a poor seamstress without having ulterior motives. The gossip ran through the small village like fire in dry grass. In 2 weeks, half the people looked at Marianne with suspicion when she went to buy thread at Mr. Oliver's store. The other half looked with pity, as if she were a victim being tricked by a rich predator. Marianne felt the looks, felt the weight of judgment, and the worst was that part of her believed what they said. Part of her believed she didn't deserve kindness from any man, that there was something wrong with her, that the past had ruined her forever. She went back to locking herself in her room, stopped having lunch with everyone, went back to asking Mrs. Beatrice to serve food in the little room, stopped lingering in the yard when Raphael was on the porch, went back to running out to get water and running in, without looking, without speaking. Raphael noticed. In the following days, he wasn't on the bench when Marianne came out in the morning. She felt relief and disappointment at the same time. Relief because it was easier to return to the protection of isolation. Disappointment because she had started to like those moments, that silent presence that asked for nothing, but then, on a Thursday afternoon, knocks on the bedroom door again. Marianne considered not answering, considered pretending she was sleeping. But Raphael's voice on the other side of the door was tense in a way she had never heard before. "Marianne, I need to speak to you. It's important." She opened the door, heart already racing. Raphael was there, and for the first time since arriving at the boarding house, he looked truly angry. Not with her, that was immediately clear, but with something, with someone. "I heard the rumors," he said bluntly. "What Bruno has been saying around town, about you, about me, about everything, and I want you to know I'm going to put an end to this today." "No," Marianne said quickly, panic rising. "Don't do anything, it'll make it worse. Rumors are just rumors, they pass." Raphael shook his head, jaw tense. "They don't pass, not this kind. This kind of rumor sticks to a woman's reputation and never leaves. I won't let him destroy you over wounded pride." Marianne felt tears burn in her eyes. "You don't even know me properly," she whispered. "Why do you care? Why do you do all this?" Raphael looked at her then, really looked, for the first time holding her gaze instead of looking away. And what Marianne saw in those golden brown eyes wasn't lust or possessive desire or ulterior motives. It was pain, recognizing pain. It was loneliness, recognizing loneliness. It was someone who had survived hell, recognizing another survivor. "Because I know what it is to carry a weight no one sees," he said with a low but firm voice. "I know what it is to wake up every day and pretend you're whole when you're all broken inside. I lost my wife 2 years ago and almost lost myself with her. Spent months unable to get out of bed, unable to eat, seeing no point in anything. My brothers dragged me back to life, but even so, I was just an empty shell. Until I got here, until I saw you." He paused, took a deep breath, continued. "You have that fear in your eyes, but you also have a strength you don't even realize you have. You survived something terrible. I don't know what it was. I don't need to know unless you want to tell, but I recognize survival when I see it. And I recognize someone who is still fighting every day not to give up. That gave me a reason, gave me purpose. So yes, I care a lot." Marianne was crying openly now, the defenses she took 5 years to build cracking like a dam under too much pressure. The words came out before she could stop them. "I was 15, she whispered. "My employer tried to force me. I ran, but he said I stole, spread lies, and everyone believed him because he was a rich man and I was a nobody. Since then I can't be near a man without feeling I'm going to die of fear. They all scare me, all except—" She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. But Raphael understood. His eyes filled with something that looked like fury and tenderness mixed together. Fury for what they had done to her. Tenderness that she had trusted him with the truth. He took a step back, increasing the distance between them on purpose, showing that even now, even with her vulnerability exposed, he wouldn't advance. "Thank you for telling me," he said with a hoarse voice. "And I promise, Marianne, I promise I will never give you a reason to be afraid of me. But I also promise I won't let that scoundrel destroy you again. One man doing that is enough. There won't be another." Before Marianne could respond, Raphael was already walking down the hall with firm steps. She heard the front door slam, heard him leave, and she knew with absolute certainty that he was going after Bruno. Maureen appeared running in the hallway seconds later. She had heard the conversation. "Marianne, what happened?" Raphael left here looking like he was going to kill someone. Marianne wiped the tears with the back of her hand. "He went to talk to Bruno. Because of me." "I didn't ask, Maureen. I swear I didn't ask." Maureen held her shoulders firmly. "I know you didn't ask, girl, but maybe it was time someone did. You can't spend your whole life hiding because one bad man hurt you and another bad man wants to hurt you again. At some point you need to let someone fight for you." The two women waited in the kitchen, along with Mrs. Beatrice, who soon heard what happened. Half an hour passed. An hour. Dinner grew cold in the pot. No one was hungry. Finally they heard footsteps on the porch. The door opened. Raphael entered. He had a scratch on his face below his left eye. The knuckles of his right hand were skinned, but his expression was one of grim satisfaction. "It's settled," he said, looking straight at Marianne. "Bruno won't spread any more rumors. In fact, he is right now in the church square apologizing publicly for everything he said. In front of the preacher, Mr. Oliver, Mrs. Mercer, and about 20 other people I made a point of gathering." Mrs. Beatrice brought a hand to her chest. "My Lord, Raphael, did you beat him?" Raphael shook his head. "Didn't need to. Just explained very clearly and calmly what would happen if he didn't retract publicly. Explained I had the resources to hire a lawyer and sue him for defamation. Explained I know people in Savannah who can investigate Marianne's story and prove she is a victim, not a criminal. And explained that if he tried anything against her again, physically or verbally, he would regret it very much." He paused, wiped his hand across his sweating forehead. "The scratch on my face was because he tried to shove me and I caught the wooden fence. But he didn't have the courage to actually fight. A man who threatens women is usually a coward when facing another man." Marianne was paralyzed. No one had ever done anything like this for her. No one had ever put their own reputation at risk, faced another man, fought for her without her asking. She didn't know if she wanted to scream or cry or both. "You didn't need to," she finally managed to say. "I'm already used to gossip, to judgment. You didn't need to." "Yes, I did," Raphael interrupted, but gently. "Because you matter. Your reputation matters. Your peace matters. And I won't stand by with my arms crossed, watching someone destroy you when I can do something." Mrs. Beatrice approached with a basin of water and a clean cloth. "Come here. Let me clean that face before it gets infected." Raphael obeyed, sat in the chair. Let the older woman clean the wound with motherly care. Marianne watched everything from there, leaning against the wall, legs wobbling from so many emotions. Maureen approached her, whispered in her ear, "That man loves you, girl. Maybe he doesn't know it yet, but he does. A man doesn't do what he just did out of obligation. He does it for love." Marianne shook her head, the fear still strong. "He's just being kind, feels pity for me." Maureen snorted. "Kindness is holding a door open. Pity is tossing a coin in a beggar's cup. What he did today is something else. And you know it." That night, Marianne couldn't sleep a wink. She lay in the narrow bed looking at the ceiling, thinking about Raphael sitting on the bench all those mornings. The silent flowers, the fixed chair, the note, the borrowed lamp, the promise to never hurt her, and now the way he had defended her without hesitation. For the first time in 5 years, Marianne allowed herself to think the unthinkable. What if she tried to trust? What if she took a step toward him instead of always retreating? What if that fear that imprisoned her all these years was exactly what prevented her from truly living? The idea was terrifying, but it was also tempting. On Friday morning, Marianne woke up with determination, trembling but real. She dressed, pinned her hair, breathed deep 3 times, opened the bedroom door. Raphael was on the porch bench, as always, coffee cup in hand, the scratch on his face now clean and starting to heal. When Marianne came out with the empty pitcher, he said good morning as always. But this time, Marianne didn't just answer. She stopped, turned to look in his direction. "Thank you," she said, "for what you did yesterday. You shouldn't have gotten involved, but thank you." Raphael finally looked at her, and the small smile that appeared at the corner of his mouth was of genuine relief. "Worth every scratch," he replied. "If it served for you to know there is someone on your side." Marianne felt her chest tighten, but it was a different tightness. Not fear. It was something else. She couldn't name it, but felt it. Felt a warmth spreading from her chest to the rest of her body. Felt like taking one more step toward him, just one more. But she didn't. She wasn't ready yet. Instead, she just nodded, went to the well, got the water. And when she returned, before entering, she looked back one more time. Raphael was still watching, and when their eyes met, he raised his cup in a silent toast. It was a beginning, small, scary, fragile, but a beginning. The following weeks brought gradual change. Marianne returned to eating at the common table. She chose a spot still distant from Raphael, but not at the opposite end anymore. Now she sat 3 chairs away, not 6. When he passed salt or sugar to her through Mrs. Beatrice, she murmured, "Thank you." When he commented that it was raining hard and she should be careful going out because the front step was slippery, she said she would be careful. They were tiny interactions, trivial for any normal person. But for Marianne, they were monumental. Every word spoken without running, every second of staying in the same room, every time her heart didn't race in panic. They were victories. Raphael noticed and respected. He didn't accelerate, didn't force more interactions, didn't try to talk more than she showed she was comfortable with. He was a constant presence, infinite patience, 0 demands. It was on an afternoon in November, 3 months after Raphael arrived at the boarding house, that something changed for real. Marianne was in the yard cutting vegetables for Mrs. Beatrice when she heard a noise coming from the woods behind the property. Sound of branches breaking, of something big moving. She stopped, knife suspended in the air, body tense. The woods had mountain lions, everyone knew. Rarely came down to the houses, but it had happened. The noise got louder, closer. Marianne dropped the knife, retreated a step too, and then she saw. It wasn't a mountain lion. It was a horse, a huge horse, dark brown, no saddle, no reins, galloping uncontrolled, coming from the direction of the Silver farm. Must have been spooked by something and fled the pasture. The horse entered the yard at full speed, whinnying loudly, eyes wide with fear. Marianne froze. Large animals also scared her since the accident that killed her parents. A runaway wagon that crashed against a wall because the horses got spooked by a snake on the road. She stood there paralyzed, unable to run, unable to scream, just watching the horse coming toward her. Then a body slammed against hers, knocking her sideways, rolling with her away from the animal's path. They fell into the wet dirt of the flower bed, the impact knocking the air out of Marianne's lungs. The horse passed inches from where she was seconds before, continued galloping, jumped the low fence, disappeared down the road. Marianne was under Raphael's body. He had thrown himself to save her, placed his own body between her and danger. She could feel his weight, his warmth, his heart beating fast against hers, could feel his breath on her neck, could feel every point of contact between their bodies. And for the first time in 5 years, Marianne didn't feel panic being so close to a man. She felt safety. Raphael pulled away immediately, too fast, clearly conscious he was invading her space. "Are you okay?" he asked with an urgent voice, checking if she was hurt. "Marianne, talk to me. Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she managed to say, voice trembling but not from fear, just shaken. "You saved me." Raphael helped her up, his hands holding her arms firmly, but without squeezing too hard. When she was standing, he let go immediately, took a step back. "That damn horse," he cursed, "could have trampled you." Mrs. Beatrice and Maureen came running from the kitchen, having heard the noise. "What happened? Are you two all right?" Maureen looked at the two covered in dirt, at the mess in the flower bed, and understood. "My lord, did the horse almost hit you?" Raphael explained quickly what happened, while Marianne still tried to process that a man had touched her, had held her, had been so close, and she hadn't panicked, hadn't frozen, hadn't screamed, had just felt safe. "Come, my child, let's get you cleaned up," Mrs. Beatrice said, pulling Marianne gently inside. "Raphael, you too. You're dirty from head to toe." But Marianne stopped before entering. Turned to look at Raphael, who was already heading toward the shed where they kept tools, probably to get material to fix the fence the horse broke. "Raphael," she called. He stopped, turned. "Thank you. Again. Seems like you make a living saving me." He gave that small smile, the one she was learning to identify as genuine. "No need to thank me. I do it because I want to, not because I expect anything in return." "I know," Marianne replied, and for the first time she smiled back. It was a tiny smile, lasted only a second, but it existed. The first smile she gave to a man who wasn't family in 5 years. Raphael saw the smile, and the way his face lit up, how his eyes got brighter, how he stood there just looking at her as if he had seen a miracle, made Marianne's heart give that strange jump again. That night, Marianne dreamed of something different for the first time in years. Didn't dream of Mr. Carter cornering her in the kitchen. Didn't dream of flight and terror and helplessness. Dreamed of horses galloping in an open field under a blue sky. Dreamed of strong but gentle hands holding hers, helping her climb a mountain. Dreamed of a deep voice saying, "It's all right, you are safe." And woke up with a feeling of peace she hadn't known for too long. Something had changed. Something inside her had broken and rebuilt differently. And for the first time, Marianne wasn't afraid of the change. She had hope. January arrived, bringing intense cold to the Tennessee countryside. The mornings dawned with frost covering the boarding house yard, turning the leaves into ice sculptures that melted when the sun finally appeared behind the mountains. Marianne woke up earlier now, not just out of work necessity, but because she knew Raphael would be on the porch, with 2 cups of coffee instead of 1. It had been his idea on the first truly cold morning of December. He had knocked on her door, those light and respectful knocks she already knew, and when she opened, he was there with a steaming cup. "Thought you liked coffee before getting water from the well," he had said. "It's real cold today. No need to go out without warming up first." Marianne had accepted the cup, her fingers brushing his again, but this time she didn't recoil. Just held the hot cup, felt the steam rising and murmured, "Thank you." Raphael had smiled that small smile and walked away, leaving her alone to drink the coffee in peace. But the next morning, when she came out with the empty cup to return it before getting water, Raphael was on the porch bench. He had pointed to the space beside him, not on the same bench, but on the step right below, maintaining a safe distance. "Want to sit a spell?" he had asked. "Sun rising over the hills is pretty from here." Marianne had hesitated, had thought of all the reasons to refuse, but then had thought of the horse, of the way she didn't panic when Raphael held her, of the way she smiled at him. Had thought of Maureen, saying that at some point she needed to let someone fight for her. Had thought of 5 years of loneliness and fear, and she had sat down, not on the bottom step, on the bench itself, with 2 feet of distance between them, but on the same bench. They had stayed there in silence for 10 minutes, just watching the sun rise, drinking coffee, existing in the same space without pressure, without expectation, without fear. And when Marianne finally got up to get water from the well, Raphael had said, "Have a good day," with a soft voice, and she had replied, "You too." Now, 6 weeks later, that was routine. Every morning Marianne left her room and found Raphael on the bench with 2 cups of coffee. She sat beside him, the distance decreasing an inch per week, without either of them commenting. They talked. Not much, never much, but words were exchanged. He told about the work at the sawmill, about the challenges of dealing with suppliers who tried to cheat, about the huge trees they felled and turned into perfect planks. She told about the dresses she sewed, about demanding clients, about the satisfaction of seeing shapeless fabric turn into something beautiful and useful. They were simple conversations, mundane, but for Marianne they were revolutionary. Every morning she managed to sit there, every word she managed to say without her voice shaking, every moment fear didn't win was a victory. And there were other moments where his gaze lingered a second longer on her face, when she laughed at some joke Maureen made during dinner. Moments where she caught him watching her through the kitchen window while she hung clothes, and instead of getting scared, she just waved, and he waved back. Moments where their hands touched, accidentally reaching for the same bread in the basket during lunch, and neither recoiled as if burned, just looked at each other with that new and frightening and tempting awareness. Mrs. Beatrice watched everything with the satisfaction of a born matchmaker. Maureen made bets with young Thomas on when Raphael would finally ask Marianne to court. Professor Henry commented that the atmosphere in the boarding house was lighter, happier. Even old Gus, who rarely spoke to anyone, had mumbled to Mrs. Beatrice that it was good to see the girl finally smiling. But not everything was flowers and morning coffees. Bruno Mercer had retreated after the public humiliation, but resentment continued growing like a malignant tumor. He saw Marianne and Raphael together, saw happiness beginning to bloom, and it ate him up inside. In his twisted mind, Marianne owed him something, owed payment for having rejected him, owed suffering like he suffered with the shame, and Bruno was a man who held a grudge until it turned into vengeance. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, last week of January, that everything exploded. Marianne had gone alone to Mr. Oliver's general store to pick up spools of thread she had ordered. Raphael was at the sawmill, solving a problem with broken machinery. Maureen had gone to visit her mother at a neighbouring farm. Mrs. Beatrice was at the market buying provisions. Marianne was alone. She entered the store, greeted Mr. Oliver, who was attending another customer, went to the back counter where sewing supplies were kept. She was examining thread colours when she heard the store door open again, heard heavy footsteps, and then heard the voice that made her stomach turn. "Look who's here, the little princess who's too good for common folk." Marianne turned slowly. Bruno was at the store entrance, blocking the exit. He had been drinking, she could see by the red eyes, by the stumbling way he moved. Mr. Oliver looked worried from the front of the store, but the other customer was between him and Marianne, and Bruno was a big, intimidating man. "Bruno, go away," Marianne said, and surprisingly her voice came out firm. "I don't want to talk to you." Bruno gave a bitter laugh. "Don't want to talk to me, but you want to talk to that rich widower, right? Want to sit every day with him on the porch drinking coffee like you're a fine lady. Does he give you gifts? Give you money? Is that it? You sell yourself to him but didn't want anything with me?" The words were poison. Marianne felt anger begin to boil, replacing the fear. Anger for this man, for all men like him, who thought women owed them something. who didn't accept no for an answer, who turned rejection into violence. "You know nothing about me," she said, voice rising. "Know nothing about what I've been through, about why I don't trust any man. And even if you knew, it wouldn't change anything. I owe you nothing. I don't owe you an explanation, don't owe you attention, don't owe you anything. Learn to accept rejection and move on with your life." Bruno advanced a step, face red with fury and drunkenness. "How dare you talk to me like that? You who came running from Savannah, who nobody knows exactly what you did there. You should be thanking me I took an interest in you. He didn't finish, because Marianne did something that surprised herself, surprised Bruno, surprised Mr. Oliver and the customer watching open-mouthed. She grabbed the heavy bolt of fabric on the counter beside her and threw it with all her strength in Bruno's direction. The bolt hit his chest, making him stumble back. "Get out!" Marianne screamed, and for the first time in 5 years her voice had true power, righteous anger, strength coming from the bottom of a soul tired of being afraid. "Get out now, or I swear I'll make a scene that will shame you in front of the entire town." Bruno looked at her incredulous, apparently not believing that quiet, scared girl was standing up to him. He took another step toward her. But Mr. Oliver had already come out from behind the counter. "Enough, Bruno," the store owner said with a firm voice. "You are drunk and disrespecting my customer in my establishment. Leave now, or I'm calling the sheriff." Bruno looked around, saw he had lost, saw he had no allies there, that he was alone in his malice, spat on the floor, cursed softly, and left slamming the door with force that made the glass rattle. Marianne stood there, shaking, but not from fear, from adrenaline, from shock at what she had just done. She had defended herself, had confronted, had screamed and fought, and hadn't frozen, hadn't shrunk, hadn't let him intimidate her. Mr. Oliver approached, worried. "Are you all right, miss? Want me to fetch someone? Raphael?" Marianne shook her head, still processing. "I'm fine, just need a minute." She sat on the chair the store owner offered, breathed deep several times. Hands still shook, but it wasn't weakness. It was strength trying to reorganize itself after years dormant. When Marianne returned to the boarding house 20 minutes later, Raphael was already there. Mr. Oliver had sent his nephew to warn him. Raphael was in the yard, pacing from side to side like a caged lion, and when he saw Marianne arriving, ran toward her. "Are you okay? He told me Bruno. If he hurt you, I swear I will." "He didn't hurt me," Marianne interrupted. "And you don't need to do anything. I defended myself alone." Raphael stopped, looked at her, really looked, and saw she was different, that there was something in her eyes that wasn't there before. It wasn't fear. It was confidence. It was power. "Tell me what happened," he asked with a calmer voice. Marianne told everything. Bruno's words, the way she answered, the bolt of fabric she threw, the scream that came out of her. While she told it, she realized the magnitude of what she had done. Had faced a man who intimidated her, had used her voice, had fought and survived. More than that, won. When she finished telling, Raphael was looking at her with an expression Marianne couldn't completely decipher. There was pride there, admiration, and something else, something intense and deep that made her heart accelerate. "You are incredible," he said softly. "You know that? You went through hell, carried trauma that would destroy anyone, and still found strength to defend yourself, to scream, to fight. You are the strongest person I've ever met." Marianne felt tears burn, but they were different from the tears of pain she was used to. They were tears of relief, of liberation. "I didn't feel strong," she admitted. "Spent 5 years feeling broken, ruined, incapable." Raphael took a step closer. Not the respectful distance of always, but closer than he had ever been by his own choice, unless it was to save her from danger. "You were never broken, Marianne, just hurt, and hurts heal. I'm watching you heal, watching you come back to life." They stood there in the middle of the yard, inches apart, looking at each other. Marianne could feel the heat of his body, could see every detail of his face, the grey strands at the temples, the small scar near his eyebrow, the golden brown eyes looking at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. And Marianne did something completely unthinkable 6 months ago. She advanced the last inch of distance, placed her hand on his chest, felt the heart beating fast under her palm. Raphael froze, clearly not wanting to make a wrong move, waiting for her to dictate the terms. "Thank you," Marianne whispered, "for waiting, for having patience, for showing me not every man is a threat, for being here every day until I could trust again." Raphael covered her hand with his, slowly, giving her time to recoil if she wanted. She didn't recoil. "I would wait as long as necessary," he said with a hoarse voice. "A year, 5 years, a lifetime, because you are worth it. Worth all the patience in the world." Marianne felt her chest tighten in that good way, and then, slowly, guided by instinct and desire she thought had been destroyed along with her capacity to trust, she leaned in and rested her forehead against his. Raphael closed his eyes, breathed deep, and stayed absolutely still, letting her have total control of the moment. They stayed like that for a time that could have been seconds or hours, just existing in the shared space, testing intimacy, proving to Marianne she could do this, that she could be close, that she could touch and be touched without the world collapsing. When they finally pulled apart, both had shining eyes. Raphael smiled, that smile Marianne had learned to love in silence for months. Then he raised his free hand, hesitated, waited for her to nod, giving permission, and gently brushed a lock of hair from her face. "Can I take you for a walk tomorrow?" he asked. "Through the village, in daylight, with everyone seeing. I want them to know you aren't alone, that there is someone who values you." Marianne nodded, unable to speak because emotion was overflowing. Raphael held her hand for another second, squeezed lightly, and then moved away, giving space, always giving space. But Marianne didn't want space now, wanted presence, wanted company, wanted that feeling of safety Raphael provided. "Don't go," she said impulsively. "Stay. Talk to me. I don't want to be alone right now. If you are following this story of love and overcoming odds this far, leave a like and comment what you think. And stay until the end, because the best is yet to come." Raphael stayed. They sat on the porch bench, not 2 feet apart as they used to, but side by side, shoulders almost touching, and talked about everything and nothing. About his childhood growing up in a big family in Knoxville, 5 brothers who were always fighting but loved each other fiercely. About the wife he lost, Clara, who died of fever after 3 days of agony while he held her hand helplessly. About the void that came after, the months of deep depression where he could barely get out of bed. Marianne told more about what she had never told anyone besides Mrs. Beatrice. Told about the parents who loved her more than anything, about the joy of the short childhood she had before the accident. Told about the aunt who raised her but never really loved her, only tolerated out of family obligation. Told about Savannah, about the Carter house, about every detail of that horrible afternoon that changed everything. They cried together. They laughed together when Raphael told a funny story about his younger brother trying to impress a girl by jumping from a tree and breaking his arm. They stayed in comfortable silence when words weren't necessary. And when the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and pink and purple, Raphael looked at Marianne and said something she never imagined hearing from any man. "I fell in love with you. I don't know exactly when it happened. Maybe it was the first day when I saw the fear in your eyes and recognized pain similar to mine. Maybe it was when you accepted the fixed chair and kept my note. Maybe it was every morning sitting here waiting for you to trust. But it happened. And I don't expect you to feel the same. I don't expect anything. Just wanted you to know." Marianne looked at that man who had appeared in her life like a silent storm. That man who had waited, who had been patient when no one else would have been, who had defended her, asking for nothing in return, who had shown that true love doesn't force, doesn't demand, doesn't hurt. It is just present. And Marianne discovered she had also fallen in love. Somewhere between the first coffee and the last, between fear and trust, between the past and the future, she had let her heart heal enough to love again. "Me too," she whispered. "I fell in love with you, and it terrifies me. Terrifies me because I thought I would never be capable, but at the same time, gives me hope." Raphael held her face between his hands with infinite delicacy. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, and the fact that he asked, that he gave her choice, power, control, made Marianne love him even more. "You can," she answered, and he kissed her. It was a soft kiss, chaste, slow. It was a kiss that asked instead of took. It was a kiss that promised patience and respect and love that would wait as long as needed. It was a kiss of healing, of new beginnings, of future. When they separated, both were crying and smiling at the same time. Maureen, who had returned from visiting her mother and was peeking through the kitchen window with Mrs. Beatrice, let out a little squeal of happiness that made the two on the bench laugh. The following months were transformation. Marianne and Raphael began to court officially, with the blessing of Mrs. Beatrice, who practically considered Marianne a daughter. They walked through the village holding hands, proving to everyone that Bruno's rumours had no power. They dined together, talked for hours, discovered shared tastes and differences that complemented instead of separated. Raphael took Marianne to see the sawmill. She was fascinated by his work, by the way he turned raw trunks into perfect planks, by the respect he had for the workers, paying fair wages and treating everyone with dignity. Marianne showed Raphael the dresses she sewed. He was impressed by her talent, by the tiny and perfect stitches, by the eye for design she had. He started having ideas of opening a shop, not just any shop, but a custom dress shop, where Marianne would be owner, creator, would command everything. He would provide initial capital, but it would be her business. Marianne thought it was too big a dream, but Raphael insisted. "You have talent," he said. "You have vision, you have capacity, you just need an opportunity. And I want to give you that opportunity, not as a favor, but as an investment, because I know you will be successful." In April, Raphael asked Marianne to marry him. It wasn't a grand proposal with public spectacle. It was one morning on the porch bench, with 2 cups of coffee, with the sun rising over the hills, as they had seen hundreds of times together. He simply held her hand and said, "Marry me, build a life with me, be my partner in everything." Marianne said yes without hesitating, because she was sure this man would never hurt her, sure that together they were stronger, sure that true love exists. It just needs patience and time to bloom after trauma. They married in June of 1924 in the small church of Hope Valley, with Mrs. Beatrice crying tears of joy in the front row. Maureen as maid of honor giving an emotional speech about never losing hope, and half the village present witnessing the marriage everyone said was impossible 6 months ago. Bruno Mercer didn't appear. He had left the village 2 weeks prior, too ashamed to continue seeing the failure of his revenge transformed into Marianne's happiness. No one missed him. The honeymoon was in Knoxville, where Marianne met Raphael's huge family. The brothers welcomed her with affection. The sisters-in-law treated her like a sister. The nephews filled her with hugs and questions. And Marianne discovered it was possible to have a family again, discovered it was possible to belong. When they returned to Hope Valley, they no longer lived in the boarding house. Raphael had bought a large house on the main street with a spacious yard, enough rooms for a family that might come, and most importantly, a perfect studio where Marianne could sew with all the natural light she needed. The shop opened in September of 1924. Marianne's Boutique, said the carved wooden sign Raphael had made with his own hands. In the first months, clients were few, just some curious women from the village. But the quality of Marianne's work spoke for itself. The dresses were perfect, the finishes impeccable, the designs elegant but practical. Fame began to spread. Women from neighboring villages started to appear, then women from bigger towns. In a year, Marianne had a waiting list of 3 months. In 2 years, she needed to hire 2 seamstresses to help. In 3 years, Marianne's boutique was more profitable than Raphael's own sawmill. And Raphael had no jealousy of her success. On the contrary, he had immense pride. He spoke to everyone he met about his talented wife, about the prosperous business she built, about her transformation from a scared girl to a confident and successful woman. Marianne also changed in other aspects. She went back to smiling easily, went back to making friendships without fear, began participating in social events in the village, first with Raphael by her side, then alone when she got comfortable. She visited Mrs. Beatrice every week, had coffee with Maureen, helped at the local orphanage sewing clothes for free for the children. The trauma didn't disappear completely. There were still days where a loud noise made her jump. There were still nights where nightmares woke her, sweating and shaking, but in those moments, Raphael was there, held her without squeezing too hard, spoke softly, reminding her she was safe, waited for her to calm down without rushing, without judgment. And on the good days, which were the majority now, Marianne was happy, genuine and full happiness she thought she would never feel again. In February of 1926, 3 years after Raphael arrived at the boarding house, a year and a half after the wedding, Marianne discovered she was pregnant. She was afraid at first, afraid of not being a good mother because of the trauma, afraid her child would see her as weak, afraid of 1,000 things her anxious mind invented. But Raphael calmed her. "You will be an incredible mother," he said. "You know what suffering is, so you will protect our child from suffering. You know what fear is, so you will teach courage. You know what patient love is, so you will love with patience." The pregnancy went well. Marianne continued working in the studio until the 8th month, then passed command to the trained seamstresses while she prepared for motherhood. And on an October morning, with Mrs. Beatrice and Maureen helping in the delivery, with Raphael outside the door praying, Marianne gave birth to a healthy girl with big, curious eyes. They named her Claire Helen. Claire in honor of Raphael's first wife, because Marianne insisted that love also deserved to be honored. Helen because it was the name of Marianne's grandmother, the only one who really loved her in her mother's family. Holding her daughter in her arms for the first time, Marianne cried. Cried for everything she had survived, cried for the impossible journey from terror to trust, from fear to love, from isolation to family. Cried with gratitude for Raphael, who had waited at the door until she trusted, who had proved true love exists and is worth believing in again. Raphael entered the room, saw wife and daughter, and also cried. He knelt beside the bed, kissed Marianne's forehead with infinite tenderness. "Thank you," he whispered, "for trusting me, for giving me a chance, for building this beautiful life with me." Marianne held his face with her free hand. "Thank you," she replied, "for waiting, for never giving up, for showing me I was strong even when I couldn't see it." Mrs. Beatrice and Maureen watched from the door, both crying with happiness. The journey had been long and painful, but had been worth every tear, every moment of fear overcome, every small step in the direction of healing. Years later, when Claire was already a 5-year-old girl, running through the studio playing with fabric scraps, when Marianne's boutique had expanded to a large store with 10 employees, when Raphael had opened a second sawmill in a neighboring town, when the house was always full of laughter and love, Marianne looked back and barely recognized the 20-year-old girl who ran from every man. That Marianne was trapped in a cage of trauma and fear. This Marianne was free. Free to love, to trust, to live fully. The transformation hadn't been fast or easy. It had taken time, patience, hard work to heal deep wounds. But it had happened. And all because a widower with sad eyes had decided to wait, hadn't forced, hadn't pressured, hadn't given up, just had been present day after day, proving with actions that true love doesn't hurt. True love heals. On an April morning in 1929, 6 years after that first day, Marianne and Raphael sat on the porch bench of their house like they did every morning. 2 cups of coffee, sun rising over the hills, Claire still sleeping inside, the world quiet and perfect around them. "Remember the first day?" Raphael asked, fingers intertwined in hers. "When you came out to get water and I was here for the first time?" Marianne smiled, that easy and genuine smile that took years to return. "I remember. I was terrified, wanted you to disappear, wanted you to leave me alone. And now?" he asked, already knowing the answer but wanting to hear it anyway. "Now," Marianne said, turning to kiss him softly, "now I can't imagine life without you. Thank you for waiting until I was ready. Thank you for loving me the right way." Raphael pulled her closer, wrapped her in the strong and safe arms she had learned to trust. "I would wait 1,000 years if needed," he murmured against her hair. "Because you are worth everything, worth all the patience in the world." And while the sun rose, painting the sky gold, while the village woke up slowly around them, while Claire began to stir, waking up in the house full of love, Marianne closed her eyes and gave thanks, thanked for having survived, for having found courage to try trusting again, for having found a man who understood that true love waits, respects, heals. She had run from every man at 20 years old, and had valid reasons, real scars, justified fear. But a widower with a broken heart just like hers had waited at the door until she trusted him, and by doing that had proved it is worth believing, worth healing, worth trying again. Because love that waits, love that respects, love that gives space and time and infinite patience, that love wins everything. Wins trauma, wins fear, wins even the years of darkness. And when it finally blooms, it blooms stronger and more beautiful than any rushed love could be. This was the story of Marianne and Raphael, a story of healing and patience, a story of fear transformed into trust, a story of 2 broken hearts that found each other and healed together, and above all, a story of hope. Hope that no matter how dark the past is, the future can always be bright. You just need courage to take the first step, just need patience to wait for the right love. Just need to believe everyone deserves a second chance to be happy, and Marianne was, immensely, completely, eternally happy.